everyone, welcome to the Rumcast. I am Will Hookinga over here, and on the other line from Miami, Florida, I've got John Gulla.
What's up, everybody?
Hey, John. So I know you are still probably basking in the warm, perpetual Miami afterglow of the Miami Rum Congress,
yes,
which I know you recently attended. A lot of listeners we've exchanged emails with and stuff were also there. I know you said hello to quite a few people, but for those of us like me who unfortunately could not make the trip down to Miami, for what sounded like a really great event. I know you tasted a bunch of rums. I certainly got nonstop texts from you, kind of like throwing it in my face what I wasn't getting to try. Thanks for that, by the way. Real quick, give me like your top.
Only the really good ones, which was almost all of them.
Right? Yeah. Give me real quick your top 2 or 3 rums you tasted before we jump into the episode, which I don't want to push too far back because we do have a really exciting interview to get to with Richard Seale. But before that, give me your top 2 or 3 memorable rums you were able to taste at Miami Rum Congress.
So it was a great event, and I'm really, really happy. This is the first time I've been able to go, even though I live in Miami. It was the second annual one, so I missed the first one.
All right.
But I really enjoyed the event, and as you mentioned, there were so many good rums and good educational opportunities, so I was able to try a lot of them. To narrow it down is tough, because there was a really good selection of a lot of very good rums.
This is the Rumcast where we ask the tough questions, John. So I don't need your excuses right now. I just need you to give me the good stuff, okay?
Fair enough. I will make sure to give you the top of the top, and make sure you're jealous for having not been able to try them.
Thank you.
So I would say leading off, no surprise for me, is Foursquare Sagacity. First time I got to try that, and I know it's going to be on shelves soon, and makes sense, I guess, for this episode coming up where we get to talk with Richard Seale from Foursquare.
Right,
and
we talk a little bit about Sagacity and the Exceptional Cask Selections, which it is one of, or the ECS, as you will hear Richard refer to it.
Right, and I was also able to try Nobiliary, which was very exciting, since I know that's a little longer off.
Yeah. Not quite out yet.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So both of those were excellent. I think Sagacity appealed to me a little bit more, only from the perspective of it was unique in its what it was doing with the ex-bourbon and the ex-Madeira.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought that was great, and I cannot wait to get that. So that was one with a 1+ for Nobiliary, because that was awesome. I would say a couple others that stuck out. MOBA's doing amazing things.
The South African rum, right?
Yeah. So MOBA from South Africa, and they had almost their whole line there. And I tried all of those, and the high ester rum, unaged, really, really stuck out to me as a highlight from the show. As good as anything from Hampden or some of the other distillers that we know make those. Yeah.
Wow, that is that's high praise. You frightened me a little bit with that.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we get a chance to maybe talk with MOBA or a representative from MOBA, or maybe Newt, who was there at the show at some point soon, to talk about it more, because it really was good. I don't think I'm alone in that. I heard a lot of people also saying that they really enjoyed their rums, and again,
and that's a cane juice rum, right?
Yes. So that's cane juice, and I don't think that's not a knock on anybody else, because there was amazing rums there from other people as well that I got to try. I just I thought that one was a really flavorful, impactful, and almost, I would say, unforgettable rum.
Wow.
So that was great.
High praise.
Yeah, and there were so many other ones there that I would be belaboring the point, and just because I'm making you jealous. But I will mention also that Maggie, you saw the picture. I made sure to get a picture with Maggie and with Eric K. Two
previous Rumcast guests.
Right, I wanted to show you how much fun I was having, and why you should have come.
It did look fun.
Yeah. So that was cool, and the Privateer 2017 that's being released from Velier, it was there.
Right.
And it's
discussed in Rumcast episode number 3.
Yes. So I got to try that, and that was amazing. It's a really great rum as well. One of my first sips of Privateer since I'm way down here in Miami, and I know it's just now some of the distribution for Privateer is getting down to Florida.
So trickling down into the southeast.
Yes, and I ordered a couple of bottles of Distiller's Jour, which should be here very, very soon. So happy about that. So yeah, Miami Rum Congress was awesome. Can't wait for next year, and hopefully we'll get your ass down here for that one.
yeah, I do need to make it back down there. It's cold in Tennessee right now. So also on another note, thank you. I know like we did our kind of launch of the podcast a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who listened so far. Double extra large thank you to everyone who has rated and reviewed on Apple Podcasts. That's a huge help, as we've said before.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much for that. We're really excited to keep getting these out, and very excited about the interview on this episode, which, as I mentioned earlier, is with Richard Seale, owner and distiller of Foursquare Rum Distillery in Barbados. We just talked about some of their rums. If you are a rum lover, you are most likely already quite familiar with Foursquare. One of the first names of people, kind of on our wish list to talk to was Richard. So yeah, great to get him on the show for this episode. And, part of the urgency we felt around getting him on was we wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the Barbados rum GI, or geographical indication. Mm-hmm. Which is, you've likely seen conversations about this online.
If you're into rum, I don't know how you could miss it. Yeah.
yeah. So to give kind of the quick overview, the basic definition of what a GI is it's basically a sign that's used on products to notate a specific geographical origin, and that's met certain standards or qualities that are kind of due to its origin.
It is what it is. It makes it what it is.
Yeah. So an example of this that everyone has seen is Scotch whiskey. So, the distillate has to meet certain standards in order to qualify from that. It has to come from a certain place in order to qualify for that. So, part of what we wanted to talk to Richard about is obviously there's been a lot of disagreement over what the GI should be. Where the conversation is right now is, the Barbados government basically tasked the four big distilleries in Barbados with kind of agreeing on what the standards should be for the GI. So those distilleries are Foursquare, St. Nicholas Abbey, Mount Gay, and West Indies Rum Distillery, which is owned by Maison Ferrand, the makers of plantation rum. And that's where the disagreements are coming from. So Maison Ferrand, West Indies Rum Distillery, they have three primary objections to the existing drafts of the GI that the three other distilleries have agreed to. One is the requirement that all Barbados rum should be matured on the island. I believe West Indies Rum Distillery is wanting to mandate just 1 year of aging on Barbados. Then there's the restriction on wood types for aging. They want to expand it beyond just oak. And then there's the ban on sweetening the rum with additives. Right. So I don't want to get too deep into the conversation right there, but it's a very interesting topic in the world of rum right now. There's a lot of debate, conflict, emotions on both sides of the argument. So we talked to Richard about that, but we also wanted to dig in a little bit more. It's a recent debate, but it's the GI itself is something that's been in the making for years. And I was really curious personally to learn, how does that process even start? Who was writing the first draft? How are you going back and forth with all the producers? Right. And then also, most importantly, where are things going to go from here? Because we're at this kind of stalemate with it. And so I wasn't really sure, how does Barbados take the next step forward with this? What does that look like? And then what is the next step after that? If there is a GI, then how do you go about getting foreign governments to recognize and respect it? So we talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think we got some good answers to that too. And also it's fortunate because like you said, it's really important to talk about that right now. But then we also got a chance to talk to him about the history of Foursquare, the history of the ECS or the Exceptional Cask series and how that happened.
Yeah, you're also going to get to hear a little bit about what may be coming from the ECS, which there was some stuff that did not expect to hear.
Yeah.
That Richard goes into. We also if you've ever looked at a Foursquare release and been how the hell did they come up with that name? We talked to Richard about that as well.
I believe that is 100% of people.
Yeah, yeah. When you ask people questions about like, where does the idea for the name come from? Like, you always worry that they're just gonna, be like, oh, it's just something I think of, and like that's that. Like, you always hope that there's going to be some backstory, something interesting back there, and I feel like there is that, and we got some of that on this episode. So I'm really excited. Like, just getting to hear that part was like, rum nerd heaven for me. So I'm really excited for people to get to hear that. And as you mentioned, getting to hear more about the history of Foursquare, because it's a really interesting history in that the Seale family's involvement with rum in Barbados dates back to the 1920s. It wasn't until the mid 90s that they started distilling their own rum, with Foursquare Rum Distillery and the Foursquare brand. So before that, they were merchant and blenders who purchased rum from Barbados producers and bottled and sold it under their own brand. So, that's a known part of the Foursquare story. Yeah. But you did a good job bringing it up with Richard. Like, I felt like we hadn't really heard the inside story of that transition. How do you go from sourcing and bottling and blending rum to making the decision, hey, we're going to start making this ourselves?
Well, who better to ask?
Yeah. And then over the span of 2 decades, becoming like, one of the most respected, sought after producers in all of rum.
Yep. I think we should just maybe shut up and...
Yeah, I'm going to go on and on about this. So right now we will just toss it over to the interview and get you started with Richard Seale.
So I'll start it off. So I know you were just at the Miami Rum Congress last week, where I saw you there, and you do so many in-person events in the name of education of rum, as well as the education about Foursquare and its products. So as the hobby continues to grow and new people are constantly entering into the space and wanting to know more, how is it that you keep from tiring of answering the same type of questions again and again?
I would say we don't necessarily answer the same questions, because what happens is that the understanding of rum is growing and growing. So let's say you're relatively new, you're going to learn from the people who are sort of have learned it over the last couple of years. So, I mean, even when you look at Miami Rum Congress, the Friday is kind of meant to be more educational. And that's kind of also an evolution from the earliest shows, which were only branded seminars. And so they are quite high level. So we're talking about things like when we were talking about Terroir, the warehouse, we're talking about things that we wouldn't necessarily have talked about a few years ago, because the audience would have been less experienced. So we're now relying on the people who have grown in their own knowledge to guide the new people. So it really, I cannot say that it's the same stuff over and over again. We've been actually very fortunate that the audience grows in knowledge, and so we do get to speak about more interesting or more complex topics at each show.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear that, like, as the hobby grows, the questions get more in depth, and so you've kind of evolved in answering those questions as it goes along. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm curious, if you were to go back a few years ago, when some of these events were first starting, would you have been surprised then to know that in just a few years you would be talking about stuff like Terroir of the Cellar, for example?
Oh, yes. Things have gone remarkably well in the last 10 years for rum. And, one of the things I explained to people is that each little success leads to the next step. So, 10 years ago, we were sort of out there with a, rum like Dorley's XO, which, a rum I'm very proud of. But it was that success that led us to then invest in more stocks that, led to a Dorley's 12 and then led to the ECS. So each step is encouraging. So, or as the way I described it recently is, last year I bought some very, very expensive port cask straight out of an adega, paying more for a cask than I could ever have dreamed that I would have paid. But it's possible to do that because I know I can sell a rum for, a price that will make sense for that.
Right.
So that's what happens each step. And things have gone, even better than expected. I mean, sometimes people also ask, for example, with a cask strength. And we have cask strength rums today. And I'll tell you the story that, that 10 years ago, if you said to me, I'm going to be doing cask strength, I would say, you're insane, because here I am already battling to explain to people, that super smooth rum isn't really a super smooth rum. It's loaded up with sugar. And, are you crazy that you think I'm going to put out now a cask strength rum, and to make life even more difficult compared to people who are sort of drinking something, sugared up and the quality criteria being smooth? Well, we've moved so far beyond that. I'm not saying there's lots of people out there who don't drink sweetened rum, and there always will be. But what's happened is that there's a growing audience who now appreciates, the difference between a quality unadulterated rum.
Right.
And so what it does is, once that audience is there, we respond. So, there's an audience there that wants a 12-year-old cask strength rum. So guess what? We respond. And it was harder to see that years ago, when you were sort of fighting a different battle.
You mentioned the idea of kind of like steps in the process that allow you to make those more informed decisions about the future. And one of the things, you talk a lot about with producers is having to have that foresight and that planning. The decisions you made 5-10 years ago are the decisions that kind of like form your current reality. I'm curious, with the exceptional cask selections, obviously that required a lot of foresight and planning, and some would say, a degree of risk on your part. I'm curious if there was a certain point or a certain release or one of those steps that you mentioned where you kind of realized, okay, wow, some of this, laying down some of these age stocks may have really paid off for us.
Yes, I mean, as you mentioned, it's a lot of risk. And I think that's where sort of my father and myself complement ourselves quite well, because he's the risk taker and I'm the one that probably wants to, push the envelope on the rum making. So, you have a sort of very synergistic relationship where I want to run out and buy the best sherry cask or the best port cask or whatever. And he's quite open to taking these risks and building stock, because my father recognized very, very early that the real future was in aged rum. So he was always very committed. And it's really because, you have this sort of strange scenario where, rum is generally undervalued. And when you come to producers, like ourselves and many others, we're not operating as mass production entities. And if we sell undervalue, we will not survive.
Right, because the economies of scale.
Yeah, there's an early recognition that the only scenario in which we will survive is to play at a very high end. And of course, it makes total sense for the simple reason that if there's one great strength that we have in Barbados, is rum making know-how. So it's kind of lunacy not to leverage that.
Right. I think sometimes the problem you end up seeing is people, particularly with like newer small scale producers, they're producing very small batches. They want to take the same approach, but they don't necessarily have the skills to justify the premium price yet.
Yes. I don't want to sound unkind, but that's largely true. There is a reason why, say, Barbados and Jamaica are, two of the best rum producing countries in the world. We didn't start making rum yesterday.
Right. I think, one of the things Maggie Campbell brought up on the episode when we interviewed her, she said the U.S. has a rum history, but it's not a living history, and also wasn't ever really known for being a beacon of quality for the most part anyway.
Yeah.
I want to return to Foursquare eventually, but I also, part of, what we wanted to talk about and have you on right now for was to discuss some of the Barbados rum GI, which has been a topic of discussion, a hot topic, so to say. And one of the things, there's been so much conversation lately that I think something that gets lost is that this isn't something that you and other Barbados producers just started talking about within the last year or so. One thing that I've heard you speak about for several years now is sort of this broader transition taking place throughout the Caribbean, where you have producers that historically focused on exporting bulk rum, now developing their own branded rums. And there was an article you shared, it was a 2012 article from Barbados Business Catalyst that I, like, personally for me, offered some really nice context on how the role a GI can play in assisting this transition. So I wanted to ask, why is Barbados motivated to help producers kind of make this shift, and how does the GI fit into that broader context?
Well, yes, you can come at it from a couple of different angles. From the producer angle, you're out there producing a brand, your own brand. We're out there, promoting a brand called, Foursquare. But you still have to get the context right. You still have to get the broader category correct. In other words, let me see if I can put it another way. Scotch whiskey brands are individually successful, but they all rest upon the fact that Scotch whiskey is a successful category.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if I'm out there promoting Foursquare, but at the same time, Barbados as a origin is undermined, it then undermines all of my effort.
Right. It's a collective. Yeah.
Correct. So it's a case that, you have to get this right on all levels. So first of all, if we want to sell super premium rum, the rum category has to be creditable. So you fight on one level of having a creditable rum category. So that's why we raise all these issues. Mm-hmm. Then at the second level is having Barbados as a creditable producer, and then yourself as a brand. So you could tick every box as a brand, but if Barbados as a category is poor, that's undermining you. If rum as a category is poor, that is undermining you. So from the producer point of view, it's about protecting the Barbados name. So you do everything to protect your intellectual property, which is, in our case, the name Foursquare and our various brands.
Mm-hmm.
But the GI is then about protecting the intellectual property Barbados. And one of the things that comes to mind, obviously, when you speak about Barbados rum, people think, well, that's an origin safe from adulteration. That's an origin where the age statements are reliable. So what you want to achieve with a GI is that you codify that and you protect that in the countries where you sell. So to illustrate the point, Jamaica is probably the best illustration of the point. Jamaica Excise Tax 1934 says you shall not add anything to Jamaican rum other than color. But in the minute that Jamaica rum crosses the border into the United States, the US rules apply. The minute that Jamaica rum crosses the border into the EU rules apply.
Which are different.
Right. So what you do with a GI is you create a bit of intellectual property, and then you go around to the countries and register your intellectual property. It's entirely analogous to a trademark.
Mm-hmm.
You go around, you create a trademark, Foursquare, you sell Foursquare rum, you go and register the trademark in the EU so that someone else doesn't sell Foursquare rum, which may not be up to the standard that you're making. It's entirely analogous. That's from the producer side. From the country side, the economic side, all of that, of course, applies.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a further step. The country now basically is who owns the IP Barbados. So they have to make sure that the income that is being earned by Barbados is accruing to the country. So if you have a situation where the product leaves in its lowest economic form and value is added outside, but the product is still trading using the IP of the country.
Mm-hmm.
What's happened there is, and someone else is basically exploiting your IP without the value accruing. So that's why that 2012 article, it said two things, the then minister said with his GI. The first thing we said was we want to create a distinctive product because, of course, you can't boast your product is premium unless it's distinctive. So one, he wanted to get a higher value for Barbados rum. And two, then that's when they talked about we need to move more bottling of rum, Barbados brands, to being bottled in Barbados, because then that brings the economic activity here.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the broad aspects of a GI. I mean, the best thing you can always think about a GI is to understand it really is simply a piece of intellectual property entirely analogous to a trademark.
On the level of a country.
Right. Yes.
Which everyone has to also agree to in principle.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because that goes all the way back to 2012. So what had to take place between then and now to get you to the point that you're at today, where you have, a GI that's been drafted?
That's a good question. There were a couple. That's a good question, because one of the things about an IP is the first thing you have to do is establish the registration and the legislation at home. So all of that had to get into place. So we now have GI IP legislation.
So before there wasn't even a mechanism to enforce a GI. Is that
there was the earlier legislation, but it's further needed, and then internal training of the registrar, this kind of thing.
Okay.
For example, over in Jamaica, they spent a lot of money. They sent people over to Switzerland. They trained in this IP knowledge. So there's a few ticking of the boxes. Then there was naturally some concerns of ours. So the process went a little bit cumbersome at first, where the team responsible sort of went around and kind of did their work a little bit too independent of us, which in one sense is the kind of the correct way to do it. But so then their first sort of drafts were a little bit too cumbersome and a little bit misunderstood. And then there's always, let's face it, there's always a natural skepticism,
mm-hmm.
or not skepticism, but a concern when government sort of getting involved in a process, that there may be more harm than good. So everyone was kind of a little bit weary.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of interesting as well, because as time went on, we could also see the value in it. Jamaica did theirs. They're working on EU registration. So sometimes, just like in the ordinary business world of trademark, sometimes when your competition does it, you then wake up a little bit. So I think Jamaica doing it was a little bit of a wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
Because we sort of sat back and thought to ourselves, well, hang on a minute. If Jamaica has a GI and we don't have a GI, and Martinique has an AOC and we don't have an AOC, a couple of years' time, this may be a problem. So everyone was not really against it. It was going really slowly, and it wasn't really that big a priority. And I think really that's what's happened. And as I say, it's going hand in hand with the success of rum.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm investing in more stock and older stock and these fabulous port barrels, et cetera, you then become more conscious of the need to protect the reputation of Barbados rum. Because you could be, as I say, you could be making all these wonderful efforts.
Mm-hmm.
But if at the same time the rum category is undermined, or the Barbados rum category is undermined, you have self-inflicted wounds, and it will compromise your own efforts.
Sure. So, as I understand it, the point where things are now, basically the Barbados government has tasked the four major distilleries on Barbados with agreeing on standards for the GI.
Yes.
So Foursquare, St. Nicholas Abbey, Mount Gay have agreed.
Yes.
West Indies Rum Distillery, owned by Maison Ferrand, has not. So my understanding is they have three primary objections. One, the requirement.
They object to everything.
I think the ones that have been covered, reported on, are the requirement that all Barbados rum should be matured on the island, a restriction on wood types for aging, and then the ban on sweetening the rum with additives.
Correct.
So I don't know if you want to tackle those all at once or talk about them one by one, or maybe get broader.
Go back to this situation of the reputation of Barbados rum.
Sure.
When people think of Barbados rum, they think of two obvious things come up. They think of it as an origin safe from sweetening, and they also think of it as an origin that age statements are reliable. So if you go and write a GI that doesn't protect those two elements, you have written a GI that's basically worthless, because you have not codified two key elements of the present value of your trademark, Barbados rum. And the other thing to understand with that is the GI is not written for us. It's written for anyone. So it's very easy to be seduced to say, oh, wow, it's just one brand that will do sweetening. You write a GI that allows sweetening, and in 10 years' time, every single Barbados rum will be sweetened.
Mm-hmm. Slippery slope. Yeah.
Yes. And then the thing is not to get in a debate about the virtues of sweetening.
Mm-hmm.
What is unequivocally true is that sweetening is a controversial subject.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happened is that the Barbados indigenous distillers have avoided this controversial subject. And so it would be lunacy to enter into it, because once you open that door, you never close it again. So here you are safely on the side of not entering that controversy, the indigenous brands, the indigenous producer. To volunteer yourself for it is just a ludicrous risk with no upside. You just run the risk of removing or adding a level of controversy or weakness to your brand identity being Barbados rum. So it doesn't make any sense at all. And again, I stress, this is not about the four of us.
Mm-hmm.
This is about Barbados rum. And that's the most important thing you have to understand.
I think the what seems to be the main rebuttal to the points you made are that there's essentially historical precedent for a lot of these things that Maison Ferrand would like to see included in the GI.
That's nonsense, but it's also nonsense and irrelevant. This caricature of a GI that they have invented, that I suppose they do it because it sounds appealing to a layman. That a GI is that you search through your history book and you find any nonsense activity and write it down. I mean, if we did that, Scotch whiskey would be full of prune wine.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Grapes from Champagne wouldn't even come from the Champagne region. I mean, it's just a nonsensical argument. This idea that you comb through history.
Yeah.
And the other part that's so nonsensical is this idea that, yes, we were all sweetening rum, and somehow we just forgot to do it today. And when you look at it, the oldest brands, whether it's Mount Gay, whether it's Martin Dorley, go and look at the brands in Jamaica, Appleton, brands in Martinique. How come all these old brands forgot this age-old practice, this alleged age-old practice?
Yeah.
Lost to the history books.
And that's not to be confused with the fact to say that there wasn't adulteration. There's adulteration in every spirit. But that's the whole point. You don't go back and look at adulteration that was rife in Scotch whiskey and in rum and in every spirit. And then look back on that really bad period.
And justify, yeah.
Where we've moved away from that. And, that's the whole purpose of codifying the Scotch whiskey laws, the whole purpose of, Jamaica's Excise Tax Act back in 1934 banning these things. The whole purpose of these exercises is to remove these nefarious practices of the past. But to now somehow romanticize them. And of course, selectively. Because, if that's the logic that something happened in the past, so therefore it's a GI, well, there's no end to the possibilities of what you would now put in the rum. So, instead of having a GI to protect the integrity of the product, you'd be now having a GI that it's guaranteed to destroy the credibility of the product.
Yeah. And on that note, and you mentioned kind of at the outset when we started talking about GIs that this is a hot topic. Are there aspects about the conversation that you see happening online and at events and such for rum that you wish people would focus on a little bit more, or perhaps less, in terms of the GI conversation, or like, frequent talking points you find are counterproductive?
No, I mean, I've been very pleasantly surprised with the GI conversation online, because I think most people get it. And there's always a risk that a topic like GI might be misunderstood, but people understand it really well. They understand that the Barbados rum, if I write the words 10-year-old Barbados rum, it should mean a rum aged 10 years in Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
They get that. People get it. People, of course, know that the reputation of Barbados rum is not with sweetening. So it resonates with people that they want to keep this origin protected. They respect the fact, they know that we're the indigenous brands. I mean, my father's been, bottling rum since 1961. I think at the last count that I can remember, we've done 9 different brands. They never had sugar syrup. So I think people respect the fact that Barbados does it differently. And I'm talking even the people who happily drink sweetened rums. They think, well, okay, I like a sweetened rum, but the sweetened rum is, a rum from, Central or South America.
Mm-hmm.
And they want the diversity of rum protected. I mean, that's one of the great ironies of this conversation, is how do you speak in one breath about protecting or respecting diversity, and at the same time wanting to compromise it?
Right. Kind of, if you don't have guidelines, at least, then how do you create the distinctions that allow diversity to happen?
Yeah. I mean, this is the signature of Barbados and Jamaica and Martinique and that we don't reach for the sweeteners and the flavorings, notwithstanding the nefarious practices of the past.
So with all that in mind, what do you think the next step is for this? Do you think there's a consensus possible here, or?
No, there'll never be a consensus.
Yeah. Are we left with just continuing to move the ball forward as much as possible, you think, or?
Well, basically the GI was a work of government agency called BIDC, Barbados Industrial Development Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
They worked in conjunction with lawyers trained on IP matters. They have drafted the document. The ultimate decision is the Minister of Government, under whose portfolio it rests. From the last meeting, it was very obvious that the Minister is wholly in support of us. He wants a GI as has been drafted. But we know machinations have dragged it out to this point, and so we know there will be political machinations that may continue to drag it out, but we will continue to make our case and support the efforts of the professionals, and just hope that the politicians don't undo the work of the professionals, because that's the only real risk right now.
So then I know kind of the initial wish list from the government was that everyone would agree on it, but it sounds like there is a scenario where, even if there isn't 100% consensus, you have 75% consensus at this point. So maybe that will be good enough at some point for the government to move on anyway.
Yes, and this has been our position.
Got it. So at that point, let's say the GI is eventually agreed upon. Obviously, the next step is getting foreign governments to recognize and respect and enforce it.
Correct. Yeah, then there's right. the real, the real meaningful work start. Because what happens is when we register the GI here, that means the GI is implemented in Barbados.
Right.
But really the main job is outside.
So I would imagine you're maybe approaching the EU first, or are you even focused?
Yes. EU is first because the EU is easily one of the most important markets, but also the EU provides a mechanism for recognition of GIs. So, they basically give you a roadmap and a procedure.
So the US does not make it as easy?
No, the US is next to impossible. A whole different situation there. It's a completely different approach. Having said that, establishing the GI is still a weapon in the potential of getting the US to recognize Barbados rum or Jamaica rum in the same way that they recognize Scotch whiskey or French cognac or whatever. They basically don't recognize it as a GI. What they do is they simply, the TTB basically says Scotch whiskey sold in the US and must meet the laws of
Right.
the United Kingdom.
They add it to the code of regulations.
Yes. So that's what would have to happen. We would have to get the US to state that, basically codify. This is similar, but not exactly the same as what they did with cachaça. What they got with cachaça was the ability to not have to put the word rum on the label. But as far as the Americans are concerned, cachaça is a rum. And that's not what the Brazilians feel, and we agree with the Brazilians. But they did allow them, until they got that change, a cachaça producer who, as far as they're concerned, were making cachaças. When it was sold to America, America was basically saying, well, no, you can't label it what you think it is. You have to label it as rum.
Right.
That doesn't sound like the U.S. at all.
And so, that's a far worse scenario when you arrive in a country and they tell you, well, your product's not even what you think it is. So that was a big win for them, and that was not easy. So yes, I can hopefully dream of a future where Jamaica rum or Barbados rum is protected in the US, and the GI would be the first step.
Right.
But there's no smooth road from GI to recognition in the US. That's very challenging.
Well, last year the TTB did accept some public comments on some updates they were making, and I perhaps futilely submitted a comment with my own thoughts.
Yes, and in conjunction with Maggie, we all submitted. Yes,
I saw she was one of the few to do a lot of advocacy in her comment for respecting things from the international community, like some of the agricole standards and things like that as well. So
yes,
hopefully there will be some ways for Americans in the U.S. to support the effort.
Yes, and we worked with Maggie because she was wearing her hat as
the ACSA.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that was so she's been a tremendous ally to us, and it was good to channel through her because of her status.
Yeah. So shifting things back to Foursquare specifically a little bit, one of the ways that I know many rum drinkers, including myself, come to know Foursquare is through your Exceptional Cask Selection releases. And you just released what I believe is the 11th Exceptional Cask Selection, Sagacity. It's a blended pot and column, and it's distilled aged 12 years in ex-bourbon and ex-Madeira casks. So I love those releases. I know Will as well. Can you tell us a bit more about what the actual process looks like for selecting those barrels, and how many people are involved, and how often does your team try to select that and taste it and cultivate it?
So what happens, it's not that sophisticated a process.
Well, there's got to be some art to it, right?
It's we're a pretty small entity, so it is done quite casually. And in fact, my son loves to make fun of me. In comparison to sort of big entities, he will laugh and say that I'll just nip into the lab and put some rums together and poof, there's a new release. And whereas, a bigger entity might go through a far greater ordeal. Effectively, it'll start with what's coming of age.
Right.
So it's not like I have to look in the entire warehouse and try to pick. So it'll be, what's turning 10, 11, 12, 13. It's what's coming of age. And then, you pull to suit. And yes, as I say, it is pretty casual. What I will do then is pull something, and then I'll taste it with my team.
And how big is your team with that?
Well, so my team will be not that big. We're nice and small. So we have two sort of tasting teams. Over the distillery, it will be myself, what you would call my cellar master, who manages all the barrels, and what you would also call my chemist. We don't really give ourselves much titles. We will peep at rums going into the barrel and rums as they come out the barrel. Mm-hmm. So that team doesn't necessarily do the finished blend, it doesn't do the finished blend. So we might have a look at stuff coming out of the barrel on that side. And then when we put together blends for the exceptional cask, my team on the bottling side will be my master blender, Peter, and the plant manager, KB, they are two keen tasters as well. Obviously Peter is the blender. And three of us will taste. And then, to be honest with you, then we take it outside. So at Miami, we were showing nobility. And, I had some people whose opinion that I respect. They'll have a taste and I'll go have a nice chat with them. So it's pretty informal.
Would you still make adjustments to something like Nobiliary,
Yes.
for example, at this point?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you hear anything that led you to maybe consider a change?
No, actually, so far the feedback on Nobility has been pretty good.
Yeah, I know. I didn't make it to Rum Congress, but John was there, and he was sending me a lot of texts about Sagacity, Nobiliary, and everything. And I was at home, not jealous at all.
I mean, tweaks do get made. I know that because those are lab samples. What will happen is that when we start to go to the bottling, that's when things start to get vatted. Actually, that leads me really to actually more describe the process. The process of the vintages is actually a little more straightforward. What will happen with the vintages, for example, we're going to do 2008. We'll start pulling barrels and vatting them because 2008 is straightforward. The vintages are straightforward. It's all ex-bourbon. So we'll start pulling and vatting and tasting and vatting and tasting. So as the vat is being increasing, we're tasting. So then we'll just adjust as the tank is being filled. And then you get to the stage where we pull that. So that's not a lab sample. That's one in the, that's vatted. And then I'll taste with my bottling team, and then we might take it out to a few people. But that one's sort of built up with taste and do that. So that's actually slightly different. Something like Sagacity. Sagacity will pull samples from the barrels, do a little blend in the lab, and decide we're happy with it. And then whenever you do the final bottling, there's always a little adjustment because you're now not pulling a single cask sample from a particular batch that's going in a blend. You're now emptying the whatever number of barrels that is, the component.
Yeah.
And so you get the final thing, and then you adjust. And invariably, without fail, the final version pulled from the barrels is always better than what we've done in the lab.
Well, if you need a couple extra taste testers there, we're happy to join the team.
I emphasize that it is very casual because don't forget that the whole process you have to remember from beginning is very long. So, in other words, the vintages are 12 years old, 2008.
Yeah.
The whole thing has taken a long time. So, in other words, much of the result is a little bit preordained, if you might say. We either have some good stuff there to put together or we don't.
Yeah.
Right. There's only so many adjustments that could be made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's going to happen now is not going to make the difference between average or great.
Right. I think you described it as very casual process. To me, I think that's part of what appeals to so many, rum drinkers about the brand is that they know your fingerprints are on it. And obviously that includes your team too, as well. But, you're very present at events online. There's that connection people have with it. So I think that's something that, is special about the brand to people. One of the things, we mentioned Sagacity, Nobiliary. One of the things that stick out to people always are the names of these releases. It wasn't an Exceptional Cask release, but Plenipotenziario is another one. Yeah. Names that, might stick out a little bit on the shelf. And I've always, just been curious in terms of how do you arrive at some of these? Do you have a process? And I even noticed that on, I think the labels for Sagacity and Nobiliary, it looks like you've added label on the back that has a short little definition of the word.
Yes. Well, I always wanted to, let's go back a little step. How the ECS came about. The ECS came about, there was several motivations for the ECS. The first one was the 1998 release. Motivations come from different directions. One would be going to the shows and, you'd be there with the guys in the industry, the sommeliers, the buyers, who know your core range, and they're always interested to say, well, can I try a sample of this or a cask sample of that? And so you sort of get the idea, well, hang on a minute, why don't I do special releases? And another motivation a little bit was, from my winemaking colleagues, I would always be very jealous of the fact that in spirits, we were a little bit obsessed with making everything taste identical.
Right.
And wine colleagues were just very happy to slap a new vintage every year and be happy that it reflects this particular year.
Consistency isn't always the goal.
Yeah, exactly. No, and so that was also the motivation. And I think too, there's a little bit about trying to be a little more dynamic, and I think capitalizing a little bit on our flexibility. On as what my son teases me, that I can sort of run in the lab and say, "Oh, this is something nice. Let's try and do this," without having to commit to creating a new SKU, a new permanent SKU, and all the investment that requires. So there was that, all of that sort of motivation. And then I always wanted to name them.
Mm-hmm.
But we started out very conservatively. So with the first one, we gave it vintage. And I always will do a vintage. And I'll keep the vintage a kind of a core. In other words, always bourbon casks, kind of a sort of minimum age. But I always want to name, as I say, we started very conservatively. So like the port cask, we named it port cask.
Yeah, Zen cask, yeah.
Because it just didn't seem credible to start off with names. And the first one probably I named was Triptych. And that also explains a little bit the process of the naming. Sometimes the name inspires the rum, and sometimes the rum inspires the name.
Ooh.
So Triptych was a blend of 3 different vintages from 3 different casks. So you can imagine that inspired the name Triptych.
Right. So you have some cases in which you come up with a name first and then try to create the blend that matches that name?
Yes.
What are some examples where you've done that?
So Triptych definitely was rum first, then name.
Premise sounds like a rum first, then name.
Yes. Premise came first.
Right.
Plenipotenziario came afterwards. I'm sure you're after it, because what we've done with Plenipotenziario is that we've used both the light and heavy rums from the column, as well as the classic pot still rums. And we pulled what we thought were some very concentrated cask, very high evaporation. And so I kind of had this feeling that with Plenipotenziario, I was pulling together a rum of, sort of max power.
Right.
So that led me to the English word plenipotentiary. But then as a homage to my colleague and good friend Luca, I love to give the rums Italian names. So we decided to call it Plenipotenziario. So yeah, it goes a little bit both ways.
I love it. That's great. And you mentioned sometimes you have names that don't yet have a rum.
Yes.
Are there any names you're going to use that you haven't found the right rum yet for?
Oh yes, yes. I have a whole book.
A whole book, really?
Every time I come up with a name, I go and write it down.
Do you get much pushback from your team on any of the names, or are these very much executive decision type things?
I think my son thought that I had really lost it with Plenipotenziario.
By the way, I saw a picture from Ian Burrell, I think, the other day, posing with a Calvados cask filled with Foursquare rum, which I think is something we haven't seen before as consumers.
Correct. That's my first set of Calvados casks.
Okay, so is that something we're likely to see anytime soon, or
soonish? That soonish? Rum is 9 years old, so it's not going to be far off. Okay. I'm actually a little angry at myself for not using Calvados casks earlier.
Really? Just because the early returns seem promising? Well,
because of all the spirits out there, probably my favorite spirit after rum is Calvados.
Okay.
Secondly, Calvados casks are very old casks. So those one in particular, they had been used originally for red wine. Then they were used for port. And then they were used for Calvados. So they're really, really lovely, old, really well-seasoned casks. And that's what I love to work with, because I buy tons and tons of lovely, fresh first fill ex bourbons. So I'm no shortage of lovely, lots of new wood character. So when you go and try to seek something different, we actually want to get very old casks. This worked very well. For example, I mean, I can argue it works well for all the ECS, but I think some notable ones would be like Foursquare 2006, the Valier release, where we did it 3 years in bourbon, and then it spent 7 years in some very old cognac casks. That was a really, really, very successful release. Criterion, Was 3 years in bourbon and then 7 years in very old ex-Madeiras. So we love to, Dominus also use some very old casks. Again, it's all about balance in the rums and all the rest of it. So I try to have, those port casks I just mentioned earlier, they're very, very old. So
the ones that you recently acquired?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I should have been used, because Calvados traditionally uses quite old casks. So I have more Calvados since then, but yes, and the rum's very, very love it. It's good. I'm very, very happy with it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what turns up from that. Another release that people have really come to love is Probitas, if you're in the US, Veritas, if you're in Europe. One of the unique things, obviously, is that it was, I think, the first time that two Caribbean distilleries kind of came together, produce, bottle, and sell their own blended rum as a joint venture.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I've always been curious. Obviously, it's between you and Hampden.
Yes.
By the way, for anyone who hasn't experienced it yet, if you haven't, go get a bottle. It's a really great rum.
Staple for me too.
Yeah, I've been curious. So how did that partnership come about? How do you start that conversation, and what does the process look like of two distilleries?
Okay, well, let me give you the real long version.
Okay,
we've got time.
So Luca came to me a few years ago with the mission. So Luca's mission is a whole nother topic, to really develop pure single rums, the 100% pot still category.
Yeah.
And also the blended category. In other words, Luca really wants to promote pot still rums. So either in their pure form, or the black bottles are for the blended forms.
Right.
So Luca came to me years ago, and I'd also knew the Hussey family a little bit, knew Christelle a little bit at that time, and knew they had bought Hampden, and knew that they were for the first time aging some Hampden rum. So I said to Luca, Luca, you have to look at Hampden rum. And he met them that Rum Fest that year. It was a few years ago. And they were bringing some samples of Hampden, and of course Luca fell in love with the Hampden rum.
Understandable.
As in, he knew Hampden rum, but this was the Hampden rum aged in Jamaica. As Luca would say, the real Hampden.
Mm-hmm.
And then out of that meeting, he planned a visit to Jamaica, and he said to me, "Well, I have to come too."
Darn.
We spent this wonderful weekend at the Great House, staying at the Great House with Christelle and her family, Luca, myself, and we had one of these and it was Christelle's birthday. So we had one of these incredible lost weekends where all we did was talk about rum, drink rum, get inspired by everything remarkable that's going on at Hampden. And out of that was born then several things. And one of them was Luca's and Hampden's partnership, which you're seeing come to fruition today.
Right, the estate bottlings.
And the idea of doing a white rum in the sort of, now, if everyone is thinking, hang on a minute, why am I using color? In the Caribbean, we always use the term white rum.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with the term white rum. But doing a white rum that's going to be beautiful in drinks. But in other words, one of the motivations of Luca is that he really wants cocktails, but with a rum that's very flavorful. He wants to get away from these very, very neutral style rums.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of one of his challenges. I want to do it. And then out of that was born this idea that, Hampden and Foursquare, we must do a collaboration. All these other, there are many, as you know, many blended island rums available, but they're all done in Europe.
Right.
None of them are a true collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're not knocking the other ones because, if someone makes a great product, blending the islands together in Europe, all credit to them. But we just wanted to do one that was genuinely a collaboration.
From start to finish. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that was how it was born. So it was part of Luca's motivation was creating, as I say, he wanted to create a very flavorful but flexible. And I think, my mixology friends will understand this. You can go and you can go there and find incredibly flavorful white rums, but it doesn't always make them quite as flexible.
Right. Right.
And that's why so many of the guys then jump to the super light runs, because they're flexible. So the idea was to create something that was both flavorful and flexible. Yes, they're brilliant white. I mean, Rum Fires is, as good a white rum as you're ever going to find from Hampden.
Yeah. But
we wanted something that was just a little more flexible. Luca wanted me to do it completely unaged. But for me, there's just something about, I did a couple initial blends and it had my pot still in there unaged. And there was just something that was just not right for me because I'm not accustomed to drinking my pot still in an unaged form. Or certainly in any prevalent way. And so it just didn't make sense to me. So when I tasted it, and so we ended up with a rum with 3 rums, my aged pot still and 2 other unaged rums, one being my unaged column and Hampden's unaged pot. So that's how we ended up doing it. Yeah. And it's gone really, really well. It's been super well received. I mean, we're just thrilled.
Well, and that being the case, is that collaboration over with, or is there a future there to continue?
No, there's always things. You'll be amazed at some of the people I've had conversations with about future collaborations. In terms of Hampden, probably not in the sense that they're going to focus very much their age stocks on their brand, which they need to do. But there may be some other collaborations in the future.
So you mentioned earlier, you talked about your father and how he's kind of been the risk taker, and you've been focused on the product side of things. And at looking back at the history of Foursquare and seeing that the company started a long time ago with, purchasing rum and selling rum.
Okay.
And then in the mid-90s, there was you and your father who made the big decision to start distilling rum on your own.
Yes.
So I was hoping, and I think maybe you already gave us an inkling into why that is, but I was hoping for a little bit more of an insight into how did that idea come about, and was that a difficult decision?
Well, when we look back on it now, I must admit we do look braver than I was thinking at the time. Guess I was younger then. What happened was yes, our history is merchant bottlers. And this is how rum was sold in Barbados. Distillers were forbidden by law from selling directly. So all of the rum went through merchant traders. So they'd buy from the distilleries and do their blends. And one of the things that we have done is over the years, we have acquired several of these brands, and famously, Martin Dorley. Martin Dorley was a contemporary of my great-grandfather, another merchant bottler blender. And we are now actually the last surviving of the Roebuck Street merchant bottlers. They're all gone. We're the last. And certainly as the business grew, as I say, with consolidation, and my father was very, very successful in growing the rum business, he was keen to buy a distillery. He tried to buy one in 91. I won't tell you which one, but you can guess.
Process of elimination.
Yeah, it's not hard to figure out. It's north of us. That didn't work out. But the main driver was in 1993, we purchased the Martin Dorley brand and the Alinatha brand. And so that's when we became the last of the historic Roebuck Street tradition. And Martin Dorley was a very prestigious brand through the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It had merged with Alinatha in the 70s, and then it definitely seemed to be in decline from the 80s. It was owned by a large group which was in financial trouble, and what they did is they were selling off assets, good assets, and that's how we came to acquire the brand. But it changed everything, because with the Martin Dorley brand, we had a situation where we owned this. I mean, our brands are old too, but Martin Dorley really in Barbados, really very prestigious brand with a history of exporting, whereas we'd never exported a drop, and so it changed completely our outlook. We realized that we wanted to export, we realized that we wanted to invest in stocks, grow age stocks, and we had a little, but it's different when you're producing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the motivation to say, look, no, the only way we're going to achieve this is to distill. And of course, by that time too, you're also trying to control your quality of what you're buying, and you want to control your destiny. So that was a major change, and it also was a major impact for me, because although I was always going to join the family business, it wasn't necessarily that rum was going to be a big part of my life. We're merchant traders, we trade other products, but I joined the company formally in 93, the exact same time that my father purchased the brands. I had no input in that decision. And so I literally joined the company at the very time that he wants to build a distillery. And he basically said, right, I don't have the technical background on distilling, a bit about rum, but so he turned it over to me and said, go and build a distillery.
Was that exciting or a little bit scary, or?
Yeah, at that age, yeah. Now it'd be scary, but back then it was wonderful. And originally we were thinking of a greenfield site, but Foursquare is about a mile away from my father's home, and it's something we grew up with it as a sugar factory, and back in the day, sugar factories are very noisy, and certainly something that was very prominent in your life. Well, for every Barbadian, sugar factories were prominent in life at that time. There were many of them. They kept a lot of noise, and they smelled really wonderful.
Yeah.
And that whole valley where Foursquare is, there's a whole line of former sugar factories there, because it's an excellent source of water. And I said to my father, we can source water from Foursquare because it's a closed factory and it has this fabulous well, and it's excellent water. And he says, well, why don't we just put the distillery there?
Why not?
And that was that. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Well, that's great.
So at this point, you don't necessarily have the technical background in distilling yet. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
So what was the process like at that point, in terms of training? What was your first step now that
people ask this, and I think the important thing to understand is that it's not about your training in distillery, it's about your training in rum.
Right, and tasting.
And I think when we go back to some of those small craft distillers, the problem is not their distillation knowledge. The problem is that what comes out at the end, they have no idea that it's not very good.
Right.
And the reason why we could build a distillery and make good rum is because we had great heritage in rum. I'd grown up in rum. We had very experienced blenders in rum. So if there's one thing we knew, is what it was supposed to be when it comes out the still. And that's the most important knowledge of all. But yeah, no, I mean, obviously we worked with great people. And again, some of the decisions we made, I do look back and I'm very happy, because, at that time, everything was obsessed with making very, very light rums. And everyone, said, oh, we had to make rum like Bacardi. I mean, it's hard to conceive that today, but we're going back to 1993.
Yeah, right.
And so when we were putting in this very classic twin column coffee still, people said I'm mad, and this is wrong.
What are you doing?
Still, yeah, this is going to make this, this is not what people want. People want, Bacardi. They want light rum, and this is not going to sell. But for me, as I say, I look back and I think, how did I get it right? But maybe everyone telling me I was doing it wrong, maybe.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a motivator.
Yeah, no, I mean, but again, I grew up in rum, and
yeah,
so we were very clear in what we wanted to achieve, and that's the most important thing. It's not about the engineering skill. I mean, as it turns out, I do know my way around a still, but I would still honestly tell you that's not the most important thing.
But it helps.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was going to mention is that it makes sense in the sense of, you are from a rum family.
Yes.
So it's in your blood, as one might say.
Yeah.
And so that helps too. And in recognition of that history of Foursquare, I did a little bit of the research, and you would tell me better than I could know, but roughly the 1920s was when Foursquare was officially started?
Oh no, that's mixing up our history with Foursquare. So Foursquare is very, very old, way older than us. If you go to the oldest maps in Barbados, 1600s, you will see the area designated as Foursquare. And there were there's several plantations in the area known as Foursquare. So the area now occupied by Foursquare, in the 1600s, there were like 3 or 4 owners of individual estates there.
Got it.
Eventually, there's a large enough single estate that takes the name from the area and is named Foursquare. And this is quite common. Next door to Foursquare, not far, for example, is another estate called Congo Road Plantation. And if you look in the earliest maps, the whole area is known as Congo Road, but then eventually there becomes a plantation called Congo Road. And of course, that's quite amusing, because how on earth do you get a name called Congo Road? And people often ask how did the name Foursquare come about? And the reason for that is, before there were plantations, the area was called Square Pond. And as I said, the area is a very flat area, and with a great supply of water. So presumably before agriculture, it must have flooded regularly in the form of a square pond. So the area became known as Foursquare, and then the single plantation that kind of sort of survived. And you can identify, when you look on these oldest maps, before there's a single name plantation, Foursquare, you can identify the small plantation that then did become Foursquare. The oldest building on Foursquare is about 1730s. It's a building, old cut coral stone building, yes, and it's designated by the National Trust as a building of both historical and architectural interest. And it's a sort of classic, original Barbadian boiling house. So the original Foursquare had a windmill, as all the estates did, and in that 1730s building, they did sugar, molasses, and rum, as was the norm. Barbados rum was affected by the American Revolution, 1784, and a big hurricane in 1780. So it lost to the American market. So Barbados virtually is a non-exporter in the 1800s. There's a brief period in the 1850s where it jumps up to a very modest amount of about 100,000 gallons a year for a couple of years. But generally speaking, the 1800s were, because of the loss of the American market. And so there's a reduction in estates. And at some point, Foursquare does not make rum anymore in that period. But it grows as a sugar estate. It's 1867, it's converted to steam. And by the turn of the century, Foursquare is, if not the largest, it's kind of one of the top 3 estates of the island. In 1910 or thereabouts, it's consolidated. The estate is split off from the factory, and it's becomes one of the central sugar factories of the island. And by that, what I mean is that it doesn't crush just its own cane anymore. It takes cane from estates. There's a big transformation in the industry at this point, where small estates don't crush their own cane, but send it to larger, more efficient vacuum pan sugar factories.
Shifting away from the Muscovado sugar.
Yes, instead of making Muscovado. And Foursquare is one of these, because it's quite a large estate. It becomes one, and of course it's in a great location, great water supply.
I see.
So Foursquare continues in the 20th century as exclusively a sugar and molasses factory. It then closes in 1988. And we purchased it in 94. And by 96, we're making rum again. So it's a really, really old estate, and it's kind of seen everything. So it was originally one of the estates, wind-driven, making everything, became one of the steam-driven, consolidated factories, and now back again, making rum and crushing a little cane. So we mainly use molasses, but we also crush a little cane as well. So it's come full circle.
Yeah.
Full circle from estate crushing cane and making rum right through a couple hundred years later back to estate crushing cane, making a little rum.
Got it.
But yeah, that history is old and independent of us until 1994. And that was nice. As I say, when my father suggested Foursquare, it was kind of wonderful, because what you were doing was coming to an old estate with a history. And one of the interesting things as well is that old 1730s building was called the still house in the modern era. So all of the factory workers and the factory manager, because this is the last manager of the factory, was a friend of my family's, and they By that time, this old building was being used as a storehouse. It had spares and stuff, but they called it the still house. So long after it had stopped distilling, it still kept its name.
It was just waiting for you.
Yeah. And then, of course, that's what's also happened at Nicholas Abbey, is that, Nicholas, again, wonderful old estate, rum history right back to the 1600s, stopped crushing its own cane in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
May or may not have been making rum then, but certainly would have been making rum up to the 19th century.
Yeah.
Stopped in the early 20th century when one of the central factories opened nearby. And then, so Larry Warren purchased the estate, resurrected the sugar mill, and also then resurrected the rum history by putting in a still again. So it's quite wonderful to see these old estates
revived,
sort of come back to life in the rum world. Yeah.
You mentioned something that was kind of interesting to me. My day job, I deal with emergency preparedness for hurricanes here in Miami for a higher education institution. And you mentioned hurricanes there, and one that happened way back in 1780, but obviously their hurricanes are still coming through today. Have you all done anything at all in terms of insulating or thinking ahead about how hurricanes affect the area? Or is that just something you figure if it comes, we weather it?
It's very hard because Barbados is actually relatively lucky. We don't get severe hurricanes very often.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually quite hard to predict just what a severe hurricane might do. The last one was 1955. That was very severe.
Oh, wow.
There were others that were significant, but not as severe as 1955 since then. It's hard to know at what threshold where it could be significant. Obviously, when the hurricanes went through Puerto Rico, I spoke with Roberto Sorayas from Don Q, and it's like, well, how did you get through? Because the truth is the amount of barrels and stuff we have weren't there years ago, so it's very hard to know exactly what the risks are.
Yeah.
But as I say, fortunately, Barbados is usually spared very severe hurricanes.
Richard, you mentioned that you're growing some cane there now, correct?
Well, Foursquare Estate always grew cane. So when it became a central factory, Foursquare Estate split from Foursquare Factory. So when we purchased it, we purchased Foursquare Factory separate to the estate. So we're surrounded by an estate that grows cane, which is independent of us.
Okay.
What we do is crush cane. We actually don't get the cane from Foursquare Estate. And the reason for that is that we get the cane from St. George, from a farmer who still hand cuts.
Oh, wow.
So Foursquare Estate being one of the bigger estates, machine cuts.
Okay.
And for the rum we want to make and the juice we want to make, we prefer the hand cut. So it could happen in the future, but right now it's just easier for us to actually work with a smaller estate than our neighbors Foursquare for what we're doing. But I could see us in the future growing our own cane at right on Foursquare Estate.
Got it.
And we also take, I should also mention, we also take juice. We don't mill it. We'll take the juice from Nicholas Abbey.
Okay.
Yeah. So every year we now have, we have molasses, but we also have juice, which we crush, and juice, which we get from Nicholas Abbey.
And are you producing any rum from the juice?
Oh, yes. This year will be my 5th crop. So we haven't started yet. We're going to start very shortly. And we've actually put in a second mill for this year. And we're still going to continue to take from Nicholas. We have a nice symbiotic relationship there with Nicholas. They want to run the mill for the tourists, but he can crush more than he can distill. So I buy the juice. Everyone's happy.
And are any of the cane juice rums you're making, are those available on the market anywhere, or?
No, not yet.
Okay. Just something you're working on?
Yes.
Oh, fascinating. I'll be interested to see hopefully what those look like someday. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us. That brings us to the end of our normal questions. We do have an optional rapid fire question segment, which I will let John tell you about now.
Forgot about that. I remember when you did it to Maggie.
Okay, so you've experienced it on Maggie's episode then.
I listened to Maggie's one, yes.
Okay, did you enjoy it?
Yes.
Do you think you will enjoy participating in it?
No.
Okay, well, I'll let John take it from here. If you are interested in indulging us.
Yes, go on.
All right. So obviously you listen to the other ones. You know this is meant to be less serious and a bit fun and a bit silly. So the idea is I'm just going to give you pretty much options, and we're looking for really short answers and quick answers so we can get to as many of these in 1 minute as possible.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and start, and then you go ahead and answer, and we'll go through it.
I'll start the timer and tell you when you hit a minute. All right. Go.
Neat or on the rocks?
Neat.
Column, pot, or blend?
Blend.
All right. Your personal favorite Exceptional Cask Series release?
The next one.
Good answer. The Windows logo also has 4 squares in it. Are you a PC guy or a Mac guy?
Mac.
All right. What country not named Barbados or Jamaica makes the best rum in the world?
Martinique.
Are your favorite person to share a bottle of rum with?
Ian Burrell.
All right. Are you resentful that Gosling's Rum used a seal as their mascot before you ever had a chance to?
No.
If Foursquare did have an animal mascot, what would it be?
Well, he does. Well, okay. It's a macaw.
Okay. Your favorite meal to pair with an amazing aged rum?
Pasta.
All right. When picking names for the Exceptional Cask Series, do you consult a thesaurus, a dictionary, neither, or both?
I will check the dictionary just to make sure that my understanding is correct.
Okay. There have been 11.
All right.
Oh, nice.
We're out of time.
All right.
I give you a little extra.
Thank you, Richard.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for being a good sport, Richard.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 4 of the Rumcast. Thank you all for listening to that, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We want to make sure you know you can get more information on Foursquare by following them on social media, whether on Facebook or Instagram. And generally, you will see Richard Seale around pretty much everywhere on social media. And
he's no stranger to jumping into rum conversations online.
Yeah, so if there was anything that was like a follow-up that we didn't get to this time, I'm sure you could just straight up ask him on social media. He would be happy to answer that. We also want to make sure that information that we talked about will be in the show notes, so you can find out more information on some of the things we spoke about for this episode. And we hope that if you enjoyed the episode, that you will be also inclined to give us a review and subscribe on our various channels. We are on Facebook and Instagram, the Rumcast, and also rumcast.com, of course, and Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would really, really appreciate it if you give us a review.
Yeah, and that's no lie. We are on Spotify now and Google Podcasts, so we truly should be wherever you get your podcasts. But yes, ratings, reviews, always helpful. Any feedback you have, tell us what we could be doing better. We'd love to hear it. But for now, I think that is all for this episode. So, John, I will talk to you again soon.
We do have one last question. I would say, finally, why is the rum gone?
I have no idea.
Okay, we can cut that part.